29.
Yeah, we're talking about financial planning, but I think it's good to think about the fact that the title of the event is Rewriting Your Tomorrow, because if you could not write that all in advance. We're all, life is full of surprises and unexpected twists and turns. And you know, there's the joke that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I think that's equally true when it comes to your financial plans. But the theme of this discussion is going to be, though you can't plan for everything, it's better to have a roadmap than drive completely blind. And there's a lot you can do to set yourself on the right course for all those twists and turns you can't plan for. All right, so to kick things off, I thought I want each of the panelists to introduce themselves, a little bit about yourself, how you got to this point, but also just to kick it off, tell us, imagine yourself sitting in the audience at an event like this when you were just starting out. What's the one piece of advice you wish someone had told you then? Want to start?
Okay. Good night, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Donna Boyd. I am a financial planner with Citibank. I've been a financial planner for about 20 years at this point. And, I started out, I immigrated here from the Caribbean. I came here with literally no money. And I was just blown over by the amount of opportunity here. And I was able to put myself through college, Baruch College, and decided I wanted to work on Wall Street. And I didn't have many connections, but I made a lot of cold calling and went through the newspapers and eventually got a job at Wall Street, in Wall Street, and that led to other opportunities. And 20 years later, I've had a really great career thus far. So to answer the question, if I were in the audience today and I was a lot younger, I would really build off of what Rory said. He talked about his experiences, and there was a lot of it sounds like luck, like, the person that hired me was at Columbia, and, I was able to do internships at, through my connections. But what I really hear is someone who had really expanded their surface area to be lucky. So you want to expand your surface area as much as you can, so that you have as much possibilities to be lucky as possible. So I would say, expand your social horizons. Try to learn new things every day, every year. Try to take up a new hobby, meet people, be outgoing, and put yourself out there, so you can be lucky.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dominique. I am a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch. I have been in the industry for 3 years now, 3 years and some change, and I hung up my jersey. I played basketball in college, and went into a suit because I wanted to be in corporate. And with my major in marketing and public relations and corporate communications, I decided on a career in finance because, one, I realized that there was not a lot of people that looked like me in this industry. And two, I realized that a lot of things that I was learning at such a fast pace were definitely not things taught in school. So Rory, I hear you on that. And it wasn't things that were talked about in my community among family and friends. And so I really wanted to be intentional about being a part of forums like this and really getting out there and teaching financial literacy. And one thing I did wish I knew in a situation like this is to be intentional about goal setting. When we talk to our clients about financial planning, the first thing we ask them is, what are your goals? And if you say that you want $1 million in the bank April 2020, well, what do we have to figure out what you need to do to get there. We have to reverse engineer that and tell you where you are now, where you need to be, and figure out a strategy on how to get you where you need to go. So I just say my takeaway would be be intentional about goal setting and really understanding what you need to do to reach your goals.
I'm next. My name's Robert Ross. I work at Wells Fargo. I run the private bank in New Jersey. I have been in the business for about 34 years, most of it at Merrill Lynch, in the wealth management business. Rory, thanks for sharing. That was a great story. I guess I would say a couple of things. The question, what would I want to know? I guess when you say sitting in their seats, if I was young and at the beginning of my career, I would probably, the thing that I've learned is that concentration creates wealth and diversification preserves it. The other really important principle is the power of compounding and time. And so when you meet wealthy people, they've benefited from one of those things. They've either accumulated a lot of assets over time, maybe in concentration, they might have owned a business, or worked at a company where they got paid in stock or something like that, but they ended up with a concentrated position. Very few people go out and actually buy a big concentrated position. The ones who end up with it, it was part of what they were doing. And they sat on it, and they sat on it for a long period of time, and they woke up one day and said, wow, what a ride. And so if you're lucky enough to work at a company that's doing really well, there's so many companies today, you could go back and look at the stock chart and say, boy, I wish I knew to buy that 20 years ago and just sit on it. So what you see is the power of compounding. The richest people in the world have all benefited from that. The other thing that you see is the people that are very deliberate. They have a plan. They save and they invest wisely, and they don't live beyond their means. And that also lands you in a really good spot over a long period of time. And I just wish I knew that when I was 20.
Excellent. So the one common theme there was being deliberate and planning. Why don't we go back to what really is financial planning? At what point do you need a human financial planner? How much, if you make the effort to be educated, can you do on your own? And where's the sort of inflection point where you actually need a professional to take over and assist you?
So
Anyone
I would
can take that, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Were you going to go?
No,
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would say financial planning is concerned with bringing the future into the present and doing something about it now. So it's kind of hard to think about, but you're trying to preempt a lot of the issues that you may have in the future by using financial forecasting to model your present situation going out into the future. And what you do is you analyze that, and then you marry it with your goals, what you want to achieve in the future, to produce a plan. And there are a lot of moving parts, and when the second level would be creating contingency plans for any events that may happen that are unexpected. So that's the way I think about financial plan. A lot of it has really come to life in the last 5 years, 10 years actually, because of fintech and the use of software and artificial intelligence and our understanding of how people react and behave towards money. So it's really become enlivened in the last 5 to 10 years, and we really can do stuff for people that we wouldn't have been able to do only 10, 15 years ago, because of these breakthroughs in technology and the ability to forecast the future and then literally change it on paper and then implement the strategies with the plan.
Yeah, I agree. And to piggyback off of that, financial planning is really understanding, for us, understanding our clients and their goals. I'm always starting with the goals. What are your important cash flows? What are your assets, your liabilities, titling of assets? What if you want to buy a home in the next 2 years? What does that look like? And really, just developing a relationship is definitely not anything pure play investment. Developing a relationship with our clients so we understand what their goals are and planning toward that.
I would say you're gonna need money as you go through life, right? You're gonna need to have money as you go through life. And so what financial planning does is it allows you to define specific points along the way. So I'll use my own story as an example. I got 3 kids. I fully intended to send them to college. I went to Morehouse College. My wife went to Spelman, so that's where they were going. So we figured that out, and then we figured out how old, when this was going to happen, and got a projection on what it was going to cost, and then we need to have a bucket of money sitting there for that day. What I didn't plan on was the girls wanted apartments and furniture and cars, so there's some surprises. But what a financial plan does, it allows you to define things like that and be really intentional about it so that you don't end up, don't hold the bottom, okay. So you don't end up, wow, big difference, thank you. So you don't end up in a situation where a life event is upon you and you don't have the money. It also allows you to know when you need to be more aggressive or when you can be more conservative. And so when we talk about financial literacy, everybody's at a different space. So Rory talked about the young man that he met that didn't trust the banking system. Well, some people put all their savings in cash. Other people might put all their savings in equities. Over time, guess who's going to have more money? The people putting their money in equities, because it's going to grow, it's going to compound. And so part of the challenge is figuring out what people are. And so if you're not comfortable with equities, I can't put all your money in it. But I need to get you to understand why you need to learn that you're going to have to own some equities over time to achieve your goals. Now, if you're Rory and you're at Goldman Sachs and you're a partner and you're making that kind of money, maybe you can buy bonds because you'll have enough. But I think financial planning is a way you figure that out. It's like going to the doctor and getting physical. Some people go in and all your numbers are great. Other people go in and they say, hey, your sugar's a little high. Maybe you need to lose a little weight, And so what comes out of the plan is personal. And it's something you need to do. It's a dynamic process, so it's something you need to do on a regular interval. Or whenever something changes, you need to go back and say, I need to readjust that plan. And I think that's probably, if there's a mistake people make with planning, is they don't treat it as a dynamic process. They do a plan and they hold on to it for too long without updating it. So market conditions change, life situations change, your job, things happen, and you got to go back and readjust that plan. So.
If you want to add to that. So the consensus is everyone should have a financial plan. But if I were to say to the audience here, be honest, raise your hand if you have if in your mind a well thought out financial plan that takes into account some of the contingencies Robert just talked about. Show of hands. So everyone should have a plan, but most people don't. Why is there that disconnect? It's something we all know, this is good for us, we should do it. Why? And I can't say I'm perfect on this front either, even though I edit stories about this every day. Telling people to do this. Why is there that disconnect between what we know we should do here and what we actually do, and how do you bridge that gap that we see?
I think the quick answer is people usually are waiting until they think they have enough money to need one.
Yeah, I agree with that. They usually wait until like a week before retirement, and then they say, I need to get serious about my money. I need a plan. And that's fine. But saving is spending. Saving today is spending tomorrow. If every dollar that you save and invest today will probably be $4 that you can spend tomorrow if you start early enough, basically 20 years. So, if you think along those lines, you want to save as much today as you can for tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, and this, I think what you're getting at, this is scary. It's scary to think about the future. We're not good at, our human psychology is terrible at projecting, to 3 weeks from now, let alone 3 decades. And I think putting stuff in writing for that reason, can help compensate for our own weaknesses.
I'd also want to say the definition of a financial plan. When people think of a financial plan, they think of like an 80-page binder of a bunch of numbers. But really what it is it's really just a relationship with someone that you trust and who understands you, that you work with that person over a decade or more to achieve certain goals that you stipulate. And it's really that relationship. And that's why so many people have a hard time defining what a financial plan is, because it's not a destination, it's a process, and it's a very long process, and it's literally thousands of different things that you can do together to achieve those goals. And it should be fluid and collaborative, and it should take into account the fact that people's goals change and that people are very emotional, and money triggers a lot of different emotions for people. And so your advisor really has to understand what your triggers are to get you to act in the way that's beneficial to your future self. Not necessarily to yourself right now, but to that person in the future. I'm really advocating for the 60-year-old version of yourself. And I'm arguing that person's point of view to get you to take care of them today, to start taking care of them today.
So I think to add on that, I think why the literacy piece is so important. You said scary. Fear as well is a big driver. It's sort of, if I put my money in this marketplace, how do I actually know it's going to grow? You can show me back testing, all this empirical evidence, but I just know I'm going to buy the highs. I'm going to be the last guy in. And so, I think part of our job is to remove as much emotion from the process as possible, and the plan helps you do that. Cash flow planning is a big part of what we do with clients, which is, our clients are wealthy enough that almost any market environment really won't impact their quality of life. And so it's easier to develop a plan with someone that won't be impacted that much other than emotionally from even a 50% move down in the market. Not much is going to change for their life. But planning for, okay, well, what's the gift you want to give to your alma mater? How much money do you want to leave to your kids? How big a house do you want to buy, or second home? Would you plan for those things, and even in a stressed market environment, even if you do buy the highs, as long as you have sort of a strategy in place, it allows you to remove emotion. And a lot of our job is playing psychologists.
Definitely. So we hear a lot in the news and the political debate right now about the income and wealth inequality in this country, and it's particularly pronounced for people of color. The recent Fed data shows that the typical white family in America has a net worth of around $170,000. For Black and Latino families, it's more like $21,000. So my question for you guys is, how can financial planning help, close that gap? What does it take? Obviously there are a lot of cultural, institutional, and historical reasons for all of that, but from a financial planning perspective, what can be done to, change that over the next generation?
Well, yeah, I think it's about changing our mindset. A lot of wealthy people do have inheritance that they can kind of build off of, but sometimes we're essentially starting from scratch every time from each generation, and so we have to back at square one every time for the generation. So thinking about things like being a homeowner, that's something that you can pass on to your heirs. Thinking about things like insurance, protecting your best asset, which is your children or your family members, and just thinking about that mindset about how how can I be successful in what I'm doing and what my family's doing, and how can I pass that on for the next generation, so it's not as hard, and they're not starting from back at square one. And I'm going to go back to financial literacy too. You know, Rory, I agree with what you're saying with regard to we should partner with schools, because this definitely should be taught in schools. But I think we should go as early as third grade. I mean, you know, the first time you think about finance shouldn't be like after you graduate and you're like, oh, wow, I have debt, and now I have a 401k at my job. Like, what does that even mean, really? You know, it should be a concept that we introduce young from to the youth, so that when you do build up to that point, this is not something that's like, oh, I have to set time aside from my workday and pursuing my career to actually learn about this stuff. What the heck do I read? You know, what am I supposed to follow to know like how to really manage my money? So definitely it comes with financial literacy and just changing our mindset to not only think about success for ourselves and our family right now in this space, but for the future, so it's not as hard for the next generation.
The wealth gap, as you said, there's a lot of historical reasons for it. So I think it's personal. So when you die, are you going to leave an inheritance for your grandchildren? That's what the Bible says. A wise man leaves an inheritance for their grandchildren. That's where we got to be. We got to really think about what are we going to leave for the people that are following behind us. Because when you start out with an inheritance, with a nest egg, you will develop habits. You don't just do that, but you develop habits, and you'll plant seeds in all the people that you're responsible for, and those seeds will grow. And so it is a mindset, so I agree with you 100%. I also think having a plan helps people do stuff like that. So I'm active in my church, big church. Biggest problem the pastor has is people dying with no money to bury their relatives. It's a big problem. And you say, wow, how could this be happening? They don't have insurance. They may have had enough money to live their life and do all the things they needed to do, but it was a week-to-week, day-to-day, month-to-month kind of thing. They don't have the investments. But what they really didn't have was a plan for it. And so how many of you see people today, I forget what they call it, you can put something online? GoFundMe. Well, that's kind of like the new insurance for, it's kind of, it is what it is, right? But I think it's a lack of financial literacy and a lack of planning. And so since we don't have all those resources, it has to start somewhere. And I think people got to decide it's going to start with me. I'm going to go, maybe I can't save enough money, but I could probably buy a term life policy for $1 million and I could afford to pay that. And if I check out a little bit premature, hey, I got 3 kids, that's $330,000 a kid. That's a start. And so it's as simple as that. The other thing that I would suggest is that it hasn't been easy for us to own productive assets. So most of us don't own something that's generating cash flow. And we need to start thinking about investing in things that generate cash flow, because that makes a big difference. So a lot of people own real estate. I'm not talking about the house you live in. I'm talking about an apartment building with commercial space on the ground level. A lot of people own CVS or Dick's or any of those single credit tenants that you might see. Those buildings, those companies don't own the real estate. Somebody else owns the real estate and they lease it and they collect rent. New York City, all these buildings, all these folks are collecting rent. This space right here, I don't know if NASDAQ actually owns this space. They might, but somebody else might own it and they're just paying rent. So we need to think about acquiring productive assets, because when you start to do that, you can do things like take some time off and try to see what you want to do. Because you got some savings, or you've got some assets that are generating cash flow. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we need to start to think about, becoming owners and investors earlier in productive assets.
All right, well, let's go through different life stages, maybe decade by decade, how to make that happen. I mean, well, just to preface this, we had one of our most viral stories the past year was by age 35, you should have, it was like 6 times your salary saved. And it went viral because people were hating on us for, but so I'm wary of asking by age 25, what should you do? But why don't we just talk about those different the key decades, what are the milestones to think about, where do people go wrong? So we can start with the 20s. That's,
Yeah, so
I did everything right in my 20s.
I think in the 20s, it's about making sure your financial house is in order. Credit scores are critical. If you have a low credit score, you will be targeted by predatory businesses, and you'll be forced to work with them because you wouldn't have any other alternative. You should really understand your comp plan at work and max it out to the utmost. Matching 401ks, health savings accounts if you qualify, and you should make everything as automatic as possible, especially the saving. You want to set up 3 accounts. You want to set up a savings account, one account for your non-discretionary expenses, housing, health, utilities, those types of things. And money should go there automatically from your paycheck. You should have a second account for your non-discretionary, that is your spending. Then the third account for investing and saving, investing/savings. And the money should go to all those 3 accounts automatically each month, so you don't have to think about it. Save as much as you can, and so that's when you're starting out. Someone can go for the next.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really good points. Good. You want to jump in, Dominique? Go ahead. Okay. I think those are all really good points. If you start saving, and let's say your 401k plan, and you figure out you could put away, you pick the number, $200 a paycheck. So you're putting in $400 a month. And you just do that for the rest of your life. Say you get a really average rate of return, like 8%. How much money do you think you accumulate by the time you're 60? $1.5 million. More. But that's close. So if I told you if you did that now at 20 and you did it for 40 years, that when you got to be 60 years old, you'd have about 2.8 million sitting in a bucket. That changes your retirement. That actually changes when you can decide to retire and the quality of life you can live. But 20-year-olds, really hard to get them to think about that and take it in and digest it and do it. So if I tell everybody in this room that, maybe 10 people might actually go back and put pencil to paper, figure it out, and say, I'm going to do that.
Okay.
But most people won't do it.
That's why we'll move on to the 30s. Where I think, to your point, where more people are more likely to,
They wait.
Yeah.
Well, they wait.
The what?
They wait. People wait.
Well, I mean, I think for me, it was having kids was the oh shit moment. I better do this. But even more than getting married, it was you were talking about planning for your grandkids. I'm still not thinking about that.
I did read that emotionally and psychologically, giving money, saving money for yourself for a future date, emotionally and psychologically, is the same thing as giving money to a stranger. you get zero, zero sort of satisfaction from it. And that's why it's so hard. We're just not wired to do that. And the number one thing your advisor should help you to do is to overcome these hardwired behaviors that were really great for survival, but have no business in investing. And that's a lot of behaviors. I mean, it's like 80% of the things we do naturally are counterproductive in investing.
And so in people's 30s, what do they tend to get wrong and still not, do that they should be part?
Things go crazy in your
Yeah.
30s. Kids, that's usually when kids show up. And you're probably spending a lot. You're buying. You might be buying your first house. You got to furnish it. Just a lot of spending, a lot of consumption is happening. So if you're fortunate enough to be in a career where you're making a lot of money, you can probably stay disciplined. But if you're kind of living on the money you're making, the other terrible thing that starts to kick in is credit. You start buying things that you think you need to have or have to have now, and you put on a credit card. And the next thing you know, those balances are a little bit bigger than you thought they were. And you were fully committed to paying it off in 6 months, and then something else comes up. And so in your 30s, you're fighting against life. Unless you're in a career that's skyrocketing, because that's the other thing that could be happening. If you're in a career that's really taken off, or if you started your own business, you might be at a point also where the money's coming in and flowing in a way that is beyond anything you could have imagined. So it really depends on your circumstances.
And just to add to that, and I want to go back to your point, Don, as far as telling people to put toward retirement, I like to tie it back to your goals. When people ask me what I do, I tell them, look, I help my clients live the life they deserve in retirement, because that's what you should be doing. You worked hard for your money, you should enjoy it. And so as far as life in your 30s, yes, you're getting married, you're partnering up with a spouse, you're building a life together, you're buying homes, you're thinking about children, college saving plans. Do we want them to go to public school, private school? What does that all look like? What are my cash flows? Did I pay down on my debt? What's the rate on that? How much is that costing me? And so being able, yes, it's a lot going on, and being able to just put, different buckets and organize that so that you are able to reach those goals and move on to the next phase. Assuming that you are, you're thriving in your career, we can definitely start to think about retirement sooner than later and how that's going to change. And it all goes back to financial planning, because it's all about recalibrating. You have to adjust based on everything that's going on. New people that come in, new babies being born, new things happen, and you all adjust and recalibrate the plan and change it accordingly. So it was something else that you asked.
No, I think that was
it.
Good. We should probably move quickly through the life cycle here. Well, although you raised, we didn't talk about debt that much, in student loan debt in particular. We have a lot of MBAs here who probably have some student debt. That throws off, for so many people, it's something we've written about a lot. It throws off a lot of the equations of what you want to be doing at these different stages when you still are saddled with paying for your education, 10 or 20 years later. Like, any advice on how do you manage that and your priorities when you are coming into this planning cycle already burdened with a pretty big debt load?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer, but I do have a way to think about it that helps clients that are in that situation, which is that there's debt and there's debt. Like, the debt on your house is essential debt. The debt on your student loans is important. And the debt that you have maybe, on your credit cards is not unimportant, but not as important as your mortgage debt, your student loan debt. And so you sort of have to prioritize the debt into those different categories. And then that's how you think about how to prioritize how to pay them down. I'm not saying to not pay your student loan debt, but I'm saying that your mortgage is way more important if you do have one. Now, if you don't have a mortgage, then your student loan debt should come before your credit card debt, maybe. but then there's high interest rates. But the point is this, you can segment them into different buckets of importance and then attack them that way.
I would
a
just
good way,
go ahead.
real quick, just to add to that, a good way to segment it is to figure out which one is costing you the most and try to pay that off first and then move on to the rest of them. Because more time does not work on our side when it comes to debt. So the more time, we have paying off the debt, the more money coming out of our pocket. So definitely prioritize, based on how much it's costing.
Yeah, and the biggest priority is to have an emergency fund. You don't want to lose your $500,000 house because you didn't have $2,000 to make a mortgage payment. You have to be prepared for simultaneous events that you didn't really bargain for, like losing your job and a recession and maybe something else all happening at the same time. And that's when you find yourself between a rock and a hard place. If you don't have family money that you can just go to and say, hey, I need to borrow $50,000 or $20,000, then you will lose everything that you built up for 20, 30 years. So it's very important that you have always have a cash reserve.
So why don't we keep moving through this hypothetical life? I could ask for a friend here about the mid-40s, where you should be and some of the challenges I'll throw out also for a friend. When you start thinking about, you're not only responsible for your kids, but aging parents and unexpected expenses there, and still wanting to keep your own financial plan in mind. I think like each of these decades that we've talked about, it gets new challenges arise that we theoretically, hopefully, are getting smarter and stronger enough to deal with. But let's talk about the 40s. Where do people go wrong there?
I think 40-year-olds are starting to mature into this whole financial life because they probably went through having more money or enough money to do what they wanted to do when they were single. Now maybe you got a family, and so it really landed on me in a very simple way. We go on vacation. I got 3 kids. And sometimes either my mother or my mother-in-law would go with us. And so you go out to dinner every night, 6 people, and my kids, right? So my kids grew up. My mom passed. My mother-in-law don't want to go with us no more. So now it's just me and my wife. We go out. She says, you know what? Why don't we just get an appetizer and split the entree? Dinner is like way cheaper than me having 6 people, And so 40-year-olds start to experience
Just jump
things
to the
like
50s
that.
and 60s.
40-year-olds start to experience the economics of every time you make a decision, how it's all, all going to land. And so you're trying to live your life and have a good time. But then you're starting to really think more, and things that were like way out in the future aren't so far out in the future anymore. And you probably have some friends that are 50. And so you're starting to see people that you interact with on a regular basis going through life's process. And so I think that's when people start to get serious about their 401k plan. They all of a sudden say, hey, my company's got a 6% match. I've been leaving that on the table. I'm going to max it out. And you start doing things. You also start figuring out that you should probably be putting more money in equities and less fixed income in a retirement plan because you want to grow it. And so you start to become more conscious and deliberate about a lot of things. We talked about debt. Most people start figuring out, I got to pay this debt off. I've accumulated more than I thought. I bought a lot of stuff. I don't really need anything. And so you start doing stuff like that. You also start to have other life things happen. Like your family members who are struggling, maybe they don't have an MBA and life's not as good, and you got to start helping people. They start leaning into you. Things happen. You got nieces and nephews. So you start to see your privilege in life. You look around and say everybody's not doing this well, and so I think people start to become socially conscious more so in their 40s.
Great. So how are we on time? Oh, okay. Well, So we're skipping the 50s and 60s. You'll have to figure it out when you get there. But just as a final question before we get to your questions, since financial literacy is the theme, I always tell people that learning about money is kind of like learning a new language. It's that there's always more. You can deepen your knowledge, and it's not something you can just sit down, and do in a few weeks. So I think just to kick off the questions, what do you recommend for if someone says, I want to get much smarter about money? I mean, I'm just talking the basics. I really want to deepen my knowledge. Where do I start?
Well, you're not going to learn much listening to CNBC. I can tell you that.
But read Market Watch.
Sorry. But, I mean, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are like living legends. They are the best. They're still alive. And every year, they sit down for hours on end talking about all of their tricks of the trade. I know that every year they have the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. And these meetings are recorded and they're available on podcasts. And I would just listen to those. I mean, they've been doing it for 20 years. And you can listen to every single one of them for free on iTunes podcasts. So I would certainly do that. And then there's a book that I've been reading called The Behavioral Investor by Daniel Crosby. It's The Behavioral Investor. That's really good as well. But the Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger annual meetings are just everything you need to know.
I would say start with yourself. I know I talk to a lot of people that don't even know what's in their 401k, and that's being invested. So I'd say look at your statements. Look to see what you're in, and then go from there. I know the Wall Street Journal is something that I reference as far as like market trends. If you want to know what's relevant in your industry, that's a resource to look at in addition to Warren Buffett. But my takeaway is just be more conscious of what you're invested in and what you're doing in your specific investments.
I'd say just seek the knowledge. If you want to become smart financially, there's tons of information that you could start to get familiar with. But it's something you got to decide you want to do. And just start to seek the knowledge. And you'll be amazed at how much you pick up. Probably some really core principles that I would be focused on. Understand what asset allocation means. That is probably the single biggest decision that people make with their money that makes the most difference in the long run. Understanding the asset allocation. What do you own? What asset classes? And how do those asset classes perform? You need to have a sense of that. So if somebody comes to you with an idea, you need to figure out, where does this fit? So if you don't understand asset allocation, it could get really complicated really fast, and you might be in something that you don't really understand what you own. And so that would be a principle I'd say, absolutely figure that out. And there's lots of information on that, so you can start to understand when you look at your 401k, how the assets are allocated. Somebody wants to tell me they've been investing for a long time, I just need to know what you own. What you own, I could tell you how you did if I know what you owned and when you owned it. Now company-specific stuff gets a little more detailed, but it's really those home runs and those things, those usually aren't the smart guy, I bought everything right type stuff. A lot of people get lucky. So if you understand that, I think that helps you a lot.
So this may sound funny, but I think Personal Finance for Dummies. I mean, those For Dummies books are excellent. A lot of the financial literacy program that I devised, that I rolled out in these one-on-one sessions, derives a lot from that. And at its core, at the end of it, it's how we built up to an asset allocation, so understanding each segment.
Excellent. All right, let's take some questions. I think coming around to microphones.
Hey, good evening. Randy Brathwaite, Citibank. Quick question with regard to making yourself be in the right environment to understand the opportunities that are available, and then ownership of businesses with regard to cash flow. How do you position yourself to do that now?
Repeat the question. I don't know if there was a question or a statement there. I just want to chat. Say me one more time.
The question is, how do you position yourself, and how should we position ourselves to be in the right rooms with the right opportunities, to be aware of how to take advantage of those opportunities, and also how to focus on cash flow businesses?
I see. So, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I don't know if you were here for the earlier chat, but I think with the mentorship and sponsorship, you're getting guidance from people that are in those rooms, and hopefully will shed some light on the types of conversation that goes on in the rooms that you're not in. You know, from a cash flowing asset perspective, I think you mentioned earlier about, you know, real estate assets, and, you know, a lot of wealth has been created and generated through real estate. I think it makes people think it's easy. It's actually not easy to just go buy a building. There's risk involved, and I think underlying what you're talking about is the ability to take some risk. And I think I wish I had taken more in my 20s. I mean, my path may seem like I've taken a lot of risks, but it was calculated in a lot of ways. And, you know, working at Goldman Sachs for 12 years, there's not a lot of risk in that. You know what I mean? I was at a good place, good firm. There were tailwinds at the time that also benefited me. Let's close the bottom, sorry. So I do think figuring out with the help of your sponsor / mentor will help you identify when is a good time to take those kinds of risks, to put yourself in a position to hear what's going on in those rooms. I don't know if that really answers the question or not.
And talk to the woman in the plane next to you. Yeah.
Every time.
Exactly.
Only if you sit up front.
I would add a quick note to that. Find people that are doing things that you think you might be interested in, and figure out how to hang out with them. Figure out, it's the most flattering thing for somebody to pop up and say, I'd love to get some advice and guidance from you. And so if somebody's really successful in doing something that you see from a distance and you have access, be deliberate. Go up and say, wow, I'm super impressed with what you're doing, how you're doing. I'd love to figure out how I might be able to get involved. And you'd be amazed at how many doors open when you show up.
What else?
Okay, there's a question here from this side.
Yeah, hi, good evening. I have a question. Is it better to pay off your mortgage with the cash reserve or keep the cash reserve?
It depends on your situation.
It does.
It really is a personal.
Really, it
you got to
really
know
does.
more to answer that question.
Good evening.
Sorry. Yes, you have to know more. I would caution, because I'm a believer in not all debt is bad debt. So particularly, I would lean to preserving the cash, because the banks, once you get that mortgage, depending on what your circumstance is, you may think you can always redraw if you've paid it down and have that asset unencumbered, but it may not be the case. You may go back to the well, and either the rate will be higher, or there'll be some story as to why they're not willing to relend. So I tend to, what you're describing is, you know, you have leverage in the system. So I would, depending on what the rate is on the mortgage and whatever the circumstances, I would want that cash invested, assuming you're earning a higher rate of return than what you're paying on the mortgage.
What she say?
Really?
Oh, 4. That's her rate. That's so funny.
Good evening. My question is more for forecasting for future professionals that are in financial industry. There's an article in the Forbes, and by 2030, the last baby boomer will be 65. And there has been an overall consensus with the millennial population, since they're going to supersede the population of baby boomers. They're pretty much very resistant on anything financial. Seeing their parents or grandparents with the fall of 2008, with the recession. And so there's a lack of trust with the financial industry overall. So being someone is a professional in the finance industry, how do you gain the trust of the new generation of future investors, given what all they have seen?
Do you want to say something? No, you want to make, okay. Okay.
Hey everybody, I'm Amos Akinyoye with AXA. We found a lot of success with millennials, and I think what it is we are where they are. I think that's the big thing, right? If you're on the Instagram and the social media platforms, you're gonna find the millennials, and that's where they're getting their information from. They're not really reading the newspapers anymore. They're not reading the magazines anymore. They're going to the platforms that speak to them. I believe if you're there and you're showing consistency, you're able to build credibility with the millennials, because they do want to learn about saving, and they do want to learn about investing. They really do. And you've got to imagine in this day and age, it's there are more millionaires now and billionaires, and they're creating their wealth in an unconventional manner. So you've got to approach them in a way that we haven't been approaching millennials in the past. Sometimes, like I own a suite at the Barclays, for example. I'll bring my millennials out to the Barclays with me. They like that type of thing. They like to go out to concerts. They like to go out to hookah lounges. But it's different than, coming to the office, sit around the round table, and, we're all professional. Sometimes you got to take off the tie and approach them in that way. And once again, they do want to learn about this. I mean, they're not idiots. They want to grow their money like everybody else. It's just we can't be rigid in the way we approach them. You're not going to talk to my mom the same way you're going to talk to my younger brother about money. They both treat money differently. That's my answer.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's really a relationship business. You have to build that over time. And I talk to a lot of millennials, and they just don't think that they're going to work till 65. That's just not a part of the plan. We're going to find another way to get this money. So a lot of it is bringing it back to their goals, and telling them, okay, in order to reach this goal, this is what we have to do, and then building that relationship over time. So it's a combination, is how we kind of get to our millennials and help them understand and bring them on board.
Okay, thank you. Another question? Okay. Oh, so we have another.
Darrell Turman. I got a question in regards to financial planners in general, right? If you engage a financial planner and you're paying them whatever they call that fee, what can we expect in return? What should we really expect in return for that fee that they're deducting from your account every month? I don't really quite understand what I'm getting and what I'm paying for. So just want to get a better understanding.
Sounds like you got the wrong planner.
So for me, the value, and for my clients, is it comes into three categories. There's the asset management, which is the buying and the selling of stocks, and the making the money that way. And then there's the financial planning side, which is the actual goals and the realizing goals and moving towards goals. And the financial plan itself serves as like a true north that we always go back to whenever we have to make a decision as to what to do. And then there's also the behavioral side of it. So when you engage a financial advisor, you're growing your money, of course, but you're growing it within the context of the plan which he created for you, and then you and him are working together to get to that plan. And a lot of it is really telling clients that they shouldn't do stuff. Like they shouldn't, at critical moments, something in the brain takes over and we become very reactive instead of proactive. And having someone to object to remind you of what you're trying to do and to give you an objective point of view can be priceless in the long term. And so it's basically asset management, it's financial planning, and it's behavioral counseling from my perspective.
I think that's a good question to just be curious about what it is our services are. And for us, we really act as a single point of accountability for all things finance for the people that we work with. And that's your financial organization and planning, as I mentioned before, understanding both sides of the balance sheet, adjusting to your goals, trust and estate planning, risk management, so that's your insurance. If you're in the stage where you are 40 and you have parents that are getting older, what does that look like for them? What do we need to be thinking about for them? We do banking, your banking needs. If you need to transfer money, why clients call us all the time to transfer money from a checking account to a savings account, vice versa. And then your lending, buying your mortgage or, refinancing. These are all things we do, for our clients. And I'm not sure if you know, but how we get paid off of assets under management. And so for that fee, we do everything else. And that's also connecting with your board of advisors, whether that's your CPA or your lawyers. We like to connect with them as well just to create consistency around all that you're doing and make sure you're reaching your goals. So again, this is not a pure play investment. When you think about financial planning in a relationship with a financial advisor, you're really getting the holistic approach and, and us being that point of contact for you when it comes to your finances.
Unfortunately, I think we need to wrap this up, but thank you to the panelists. This was terrific. I want to invite Andrew up, but you can make them each earn their fees afterwards by asking additional questions afterwards, I'm sure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.